The first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar sedan parked in the driveway of my parents' house. No, asterisk my asterisk house. The one I'd been making payments on for the past 7 years. A knot formed in my stomach as I pulled up behind it, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Something was off. I'm Morgan Wu, 34 years old and a senior investment advisor at Meridian Capital. For most of my adult life, I've been the dutiful daughter, the reliable provider, the one who could always be counted on to step up when my family needed something, especially financial support. The front door of the modest two-story colonial had been repainted a deep burgundy since my last visit 3 weeks ago. I stood on the porch for a moment, key in hand, suddenly feeling like an intruder. This was supposed to be my investment property, the home I'd bought to provide stability for my aging parents while building equity for my own future. At least, that's what I'd told myself. I didn't bother knocking. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and I stepped into what felt like an alternate reality. The living room furniture had been rearranged. New curtains hung over the windows I'd paid to replace last summer. Photos I didn't recognize lined the mantel, and the distinct scent of unfamiliar perfume hung in the air. Hello, I called out, my voice echoing through the space that suddenly felt foreign. Footsteps sounded from upstairs, followed by hushed whispers. Then my younger brother Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression shifting from surprise to something resembling guilt when he saw me. Morgan, we weren't expecting you today. His voice was too cheerful, too forced. Clearly, I replied, setting my purse down on the entryway table. What's going on, Ethan? Whose car is that in the driveway? Before he could answer, a young woman with long auburn hair appeared beside him. She offered a hesitant smile and a small wave. You must be Morgan, she said. I'm Natalie. It's so nice to finally meet you. My brother's arm slid around her waist possessively. Nat moved in last weekend. We were going to tell you at Sunday dinner. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Moved in, I repeated slowly, into this house, the one I'm paying for. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Mom and Dad said it was fine. They want us to be comfortable while we're planning the wedding. Wedding, the room seemed to tilt slightly. Where are Mom and Dad? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Florida, Ethan replied casually. Dad's back is bothering him again, so they decided to rent a condo for a few months. The warm weather helps, you know. I didn't know, no one had bothered to tell me. When did they leave? About 2 weeks ago, they said they called you. They hadn't. My mother chose that moment to call, as if summoned by our conversation. My phone buzzed in my pocket, her name flashing across the screen. I stepped onto the back porch for privacy, leaving Ethan and his fiancée, a woman I never knew existed until 5 minutes ago, standing awkwardly in the living room. Morgan, darling, how are you? My mother's voice was bright and breezy, sunshine and palm trees evident in her tone. You're in Florida, I stated flatly. A pause. Oh, did Ethan tell you? Yes, your father's back has been giving him such trouble. The doctor suggested warmth and rest. And Ethan's fiancée has moved into the house. Another pause, longer this time. Well, yes, they're young and saving for their wedding. It just made sense. You don't mind, do you? It's just temporary. Just temporary? The same thing they'd said when I agreed to buy this house 7 years ago. A temporary arrangement until they got back on their feet after Dad's company downsized. A temporary solution to their financial problems. A temporary sacrifice on my part. 7 years of mortgage payments didn't feel temporary. Actually, Mom, I do mind. I'm the one paying for that house. I should have been consulted before you invited someone else to live there. My mother's tone shifted immediately, a familiar coolness entering her voice. Morgan, don't be selfish. Your brother deserves a chance at happiness. You wouldn't begrudge him that, would you, after all we've done for you? And there it was, the guilt trip, right on schedule. The implied obligation, the suggestion that I somehow still owed them despite the thousands of dollars I'd poured into their lives over the years. We can discuss this when you get back, I said tightly. When will that be? Oh, we're not sure yet. The condo is paid through August, but if your father's back improves, we might come home sooner. August, it was only March. I need to go, Mom. I'll call you later. I ended the call before she could respond and leaned against the porch railing, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Anger, betrayal, a deep aching sense that I'd been used again. When I returned inside, Ethan and Natalie were sitting on the couch I'd purchased last Christmas, looking uncomfortable. Everything okay? Ethan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Not really, I replied. I should have been told about these arrangements, Ethan. This isn't just Mom and Dad's house, it's my investment. I'm the one making the mortgage payments. My brother had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but it quickly gave way to the defensive expression I knew all too well. They said you wouldn't mind, he insisted. And it's not like you need the money, Morgan. You're doing great at that fancy firm. Meanwhile, Nat and I are just starting out. The implication stung. Because I'd worked hard and built a successful career, somehow my financial commitments didn't matter as much as his needs. I'm going to look around, I said instead of arguing, see what else has changed without my knowledge. The upstairs guest bedroom had been transformed into a home office, with Ethan's gaming computer setup taking up most of the space. The bathroom had new fixtures. The kitchen sported a sleek espresso machine that definitely hadn't been there during my last visit. By the time I'd completed my tour, the anger had crystallized into something harder, colder, and more resolute. This pattern had to stop. The meeting with my financial advisor, Eliner, was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I'd originally intended to discuss my retirement portfolio, but now I had more pressing concerns. I need to know exactly where I stand with the house, I said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I've been making extra payments toward the principal for years, but suddenly I'm wondering if that money has been going where I think it has. Eliner frowned slightly as she pulled up my accounts on her computer. Let me see what we've got here. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Morgan, she said finally, turning the screen so I could see it. According to these records, you've made consistent payments on the mortgage, but the additional funds you've been sending. What about them? They've been withdrawn almost immediately after being deposited, small amounts at first, but increasing over the past 2 years. She pointed to a series of transactions. These coincide with the extra payment dates. The room seemed to grow colder as I stared at the screen. Who's been withdrawing the money? The account requires dual authorization, Eliner explained gently. Both your signature and your parents'. According to these records, they've been authorizing withdrawals consistently. My extra payments, the money I thought was going toward building equity in the house, had been systematically drained by my own parents. Money I'd worked overtime to earn, money I'd sacrificed vacations and my own apartment ownership to provide. How much? I asked, my voice barely audible. Eliner did some quick calculations. Over the 7 years, approximately $98,000 beyond the regular mortgage payments. Nearly $100,000 gone, my down payment for my own place, my safety net, my future. What are my options? I asked when I could finally speak again. Eliner laid them out plainly. Since my name was on the deed alongside my parents, I had legal recourse. I could demand an accounting of where the money went. I could force a sale of the property. I could stop making payments altogether, though that would damage my credit if the house went into foreclosure. I left her office with a folder full of documents and a heart full of betrayal. The sunny spring day seemed to mock my darkening mood as I walked to my car, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. That evening, I made an appointment with a therapist. If I was going to navigate this situation without completely destroying my family relationships or myself, I needed professional guidance. Dr. Patel had been recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a difficult divorce. She doesn't sugarcoat things, my colleague had said, but she helps you find your own answers. The first session was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. In the meantime, I threw myself into research, reading about financial abuse, family dynamics, and the psychology of guilt and obligation. With each article, each forum post from others who'd experienced similar situations, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, boundaries, and my own self-worth. Tell me why you're here, Morgan, Dr. Patel said after I'd settled into the comfortable armchair in her office. For a moment, I wasn't sure where to begin. The immediate betrayal, the lifetime of subtle manipulation, the growing realization that I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for. I think I've been financially supporting my family at the expense of my own well-being, I said finally, and I've just discovered that the situation is worse than I realized. Dr. Patel nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. How long has this been going on? Officially, since I bought a house for my parents 7 years ago. Unofficially, since I got my first job at 16 and my parents suggested I help with the utilities. Over the next 50 minutes, I outlined my family's dynamics, my role as the responsible, high-achieving daughter, Ethan's position as the beloved son who needed extra support and leeway, my parents' subtle but persistent messaging that family took care of each other, which somehow always translated to me taking care of them. What prompted you to seek therapy now? Dr. Patel asked as our session neared its end. I told her about the house, the unauthorized withdrawals, Ethan's fiancé, my parents' extended Florida stay. I'm angry, I admitted, angrier than I've ever allowed myself to be with them, and I'm afraid of what I might do with that anger. Anger can be a powerful catalyst for change when channeled appropriately, she observed. What changes are you considering? I'm thinking about stopping the payments on the house. Dr. Patel didn't look shocked or disapproving, which surprised me. And how do you feel about that possibility? Guilty, I said immediately, terrified but also relieved, like I might finally be standing up for myself. She nodded thoughtfully. Those are all valid feelings. Over the next few sessions, we can work on distinguishing between healthy guilt that guides our moral compass and unhealthy guilt that keeps us trapped in harmful patterns. I left her office feeling drained but slightly lighter, as if numbing my feelings had diminished their power over me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of therapy sessions, consultations with financial and legal advisors, and careful planning. I avoided my parents' calls more often than I answered them, claiming work obligations when they pushed for explanations. When we did speak, I kept our conversations superficial, unwilling to confront them until I was fully prepared. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected while prioritizing my family's needs. Lisa, my college roommate, listened in horror as I explained the situation over dinner. Morgan, that's financial abuse, she said bluntly. They've been taking advantage of you for years. I let them, I pointed out. Because they conditioned you to, Lisa countered, that doesn't make it okay. Her outrage on my behalf was validating in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd normalized my family's expectations, convinced myself that my sacrifices were a daughter's duty. Seeing the situation through my friend's eyes helped solidify my resolve. By the time May arrived, I had a clear plan in place. I'd found a modest townhouse in a neighborhood I loved, one I could afford on my own. I'd consulted with my lawyer about my options regarding the family house. And most importantly, I'd worked with Dr. Patel on setting boundaries, something I'd never been good at when it came to my family. The confrontation came sooner than I'd expected. My parents returned from Florida earlier than planned, summoned home by Ethan's urgent calls after I'd stopped responding to requests for additional funds for household repairs. They wanted a family dinner. I suggested meeting at a restaurant instead, neutral territory. The moment I saw them sitting at the table, my mother's practiced smile, my father's imposing presence, a familiar anxiety fluttered in my chest. For a fleeting second, I considered abandoning my plan, falling back into old patterns to keep the peace. Then I remembered Eleanor's computer screen showing the systematic withdrawal of my hard-earned money. I remembered Dr. Patel's gentle guidance. Your financial well-being is not less important than theirs. I remembered Lisa's indignation on my behalf. I straightened my shoulders and took my seat. Morgan, darling, you look tired, my mother began, reaching across to pat my hand. Are they working you too hard at that firm? I'm fine, Mom, I replied, withdrawing my hand casually to reach for my water glass. How was Florida? Magnificent, my father answered. The condo was perfect, right on the beach, just what the doctor ordered for my back. We're thinking of going back in the fall. That sounds expensive, I observed mildly. How are you planning to afford another extended stay? A moment of awkward silence fell over the table. My parents exchanged a glance I'd seen many times before, the one that preceded a request for money. Well, my mother said delicately, we were hoping you might consider it an investment in your father's health. After all, it's cheaper than medical bills in the long run. Speaking of investments, I said, I've been going over my finances recently. Did you know that almost $100,000 of my extra mortgage payments have been withdrawn from the house account over the past 7 years? The directness of my question seemed to startle them. My father's expression hardened. That account was set up for household expenses, he said defensively. The house has needed a lot of maintenance. $98,000 worth? I asked skeptically. That's quite a lot of maintenance for a house that was in good condition when I bought it. My mother's smile turned brittle. Morgan, you know your father and I have had our struggles since the downsizing. That money helped us get by. And paid for your Florida rental, I added, and Ethan's new gaming setup and Natalie's engagement ring, I'm guessing. Your brother deserves a chance at happiness, my father said sternly. We all make sacrifices for family. Some more than others, apparently, I replied, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. I've been making sacrifices for this family since I was a teenager. When do I get to prioritize my own happiness? You've always been so independent, Morgan, my mother said soothingly. So capable, Ethan needs more support. I needed support too, I said quietly. I just never asked for it because I was taught that my role was to provide, not receive. My father's expression darkened. Is this why you've been avoiding our calls? You're upset about money. It's not just about the money, Dad. It's about respect, transparency, consideration. You gave me no say in Ethan and Natalie moving into a house I'm paying for. You didn't tell me you were withdrawing the extra payments I was making. You make decisions that affect me financially without consulting me. We're your parents, my father said, as if that explained everything. Yes, you are, and I love you both, but I'm also a 34-year-old woman with my own financial goals and needs. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. I've bought a townhouse. I'm moving in next month. My mother's eyes widened. But darling, why would you need your own place when you can stay with us whenever you visit? It's such a waste of money. It's my money to waste, I replied firmly. And I've also made another decision. I won't be making any more payments on the family house. The stunned silence that followed was deafening. You can't do that, my father finally sputtered. Your name is on the mortgage, you'll ruin your credit. I'm aware of the risks, I said calmly. I've discussed them with my financial advisor and my lawyer. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of my decision, including potential damage to my credit score. This is ridiculous, my father snapped, his voice rising enough to draw glances from nearby tables. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me lately, Dad? I interrupted, my own voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Besides, take my money and make me feel guilty for having boundaries. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her go-to response when confrontation got uncomfortable. How can you be so cruel? We're family. Yes, we are, I agreed. And I want us to have a healthy relationship. But that can't happen if you continue to see me as a financial resource rather than a daughter with her own needs and goals. So you're just going to abandon us? My father demanded. Let the house go into foreclosure, leave us homeless. You have options, I pointed out. You can sell the house and downsize, you can refinance the mortgage, you can get jobs to cover the payments yourselves. I'm not responsible for solving this problem, a problem that exists largely because you've been misusing the funds I provided. The rest of the dinner was tense and uncomfortable. My parents alternated between guilt trips, angry accusations, and tearful pleas. I remained firm, repeating the boundaries I'd practiced with Dr. Patel. I would no longer provide financial support. I would maintain a relationship with them if they could respect my decision. I would welcome them into my new home as visitors, not dependents. When we parted outside the restaurant, my mother hugged me stiffly, whispering, I hope you'll reconsider once you've calmed down. My father didn't hug me at all. The fallout was exactly as I'd expected. Ethan called the next day, angry and bewildered. What the hell, Morgan? Mom's been crying all night and Dad's talking about having to sell the house. What's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with me, I replied. I'm finally recognizing that I've been financially exploited by our parents for years and I'm putting a stop to it. Exploited, he sounded genuinely shocked. They're our parents, not some corporate scammers. They've devoted their lives to raising us. And I appreciate that, I said sincerely, but their role as parents doesn't entitle them to my entire financial future. I've given enough, Ethan, more than enough. So you're just going to let the house go into foreclosure? Where are Mom and Dad supposed to live? Where are Natalie and I supposed to go? The question made me laugh despite the seriousness of the situation. You're adults, Ethan, figure it out just like I've been doing since I was 18. Get jobs that pay enough for rent, downsize your expectations, live within your means. That's cold, Morgan. No, it's reality. The reality I've been living in while the rest of you enjoyed the fruits of my labor. He hung up on me. I expected nothing less. The next few weeks were a storm of emotions and logistics. My parents alternated between pleading phone calls and icy silence. Extended family members I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions about my abandonment of my family duties. Ethan and Natalie moved out of the house in dramatic protest, though where they went, I didn't ask. Through it all, I focused on my new home. I painted walls, selected furniture that suited my taste rather than my parents' preferences, and slowly built a space that felt truly mine. Each decision, from the color of my kitchen backsplash to the placement of my reading chair, was a small act of reclamation. Dr. Patel helped me navigate the guilt that occasionally threatened to derail my resolve. Guilt is the emotional equivalent of growing pains, she told me. It hurts because you're stretching beyond the confines of the role you've been assigned. Lisa and other friends rallied around me, helping with moving day and celebrating my new beginning with a housewarming party. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who supported my choices rather than exploited them. The mortgage company began sending notices to the family house as promised payments failed to materialize. My parents' attempts to guilt me into resuming payments became increasingly desperate, then hostile, and finally resigned. 6 months after our confrontation at the restaurant, the house went into pre-foreclosure status. My credit score took a hit, but not as severe as I'd feared. My lawyer had helped me document the unauthorized withdrawals, which mitigated some of the damage. My parents eventually moved into a small apartment, downsizing decades of possessions in a process they made sure to describe to me in painstaking detail. emphasizing how difficult and humiliating it had been. Ethan and Natalie postponed their wedding, citing financial hardship. I felt sorry for their struggles, genuinely, but I no longer felt responsible for solving them. 1 year after I stopped making payments on the family house, I hosted a small gathering at my townhouse. Lisa was there, along with colleagues who had become friends and neighbors I'd grown close to. We toasted to new beginnings and hard-won wisdom. After everyone left, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother, the first in several weeks. Your father and I are adjusting to the apartment. It's small but manageable. Ethan and Natalie visited yesterday. They're thinking spring wedding now, very small ceremony. You would be welcome to attend. No guilt trip, no financial request, just information and a cautious invitation. I typed a response, thank you for letting me know, I'd like to hear more about their plans. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. The betrayal still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it, but it was an opening, a possibility that our relationship might eventually evolve into something healthier, more balanced. As the last light faded from the sky, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The price of my loyalty had been steep, nearly $100,000 and years of self-neglect, but the cost of reclaiming my life, that had been worth every penny. In the end, the house my parents lost was just a structure. The home I gained was something far more valuable, a life authentically mine, boundaries firmly in place, and the newfound confidence that I would never again allow anyone, family or otherwise, to build their future at the expense of my own.